Caleb Robbins, talk a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Well, thanks for asking. I'm the TCK coordinator for Pioneer Bible Translators. That's an acronym that stands for Third Culture Kid Coordinator. I grew up in Africa, was born and raised. One of my favorite pictures growing up was a picture of my dad handing me to my mom, who's in the back of a pickup truck. That was our ambulance from the way home from the hospital. So that was pretty cool. I spent a lot of time overseas, and one of the things that I learned when I started doing youth ministry was that for most highly mobile children, by the time you reach adolescence, about 13 years old, you've experienced more trauma than most people do in a lifetime.
Wow.
And so one of the things that my parents did after they worked extensively with Bible translation was they started working in trauma healing. And in about 2014, I got interested in working in trauma healing. And between that point and this point, I've gotten certified as a master facilitator in the classic adult trauma healing and the teen trauma healing, which is actually the first time I met you. But I'm a glorified youth pastor. All those acronyms aside, sweep them away, get them out of here. I love kids, and I love the potential kids have, and I love seeing kids thrive in the identity they have as being God's children. And that's something that you can't, I don't think there's anything like it. Working with children and seeing that growth and that potential realized is magnificent. But I got married at 20 years old, met the love of my life when I was 18.
Wow.
And since then we have 5 kids. My oldest is 18, my youngest is 9. I actually, this was my wife's idea, no matter who tells you different, named my kids Creed, Asher, Liam. Then we had a miscarriage, Echo, Bella, and Serenity. So if you follow that, it spells Caleb's.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. But I live in Duncanville, and I love being a missionary. I love working here with the youth group, and I love doing trauma healing when I can. I love traveling, and I also have a passion for weightlifting. So, yeah, there's a little bit about myself.
Well, thank you. That was great. What was it that first drew you to bring trauma healing into youth ministry? What gave you the idea that this is something that we really need here?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that when I went through trauma healing initially, one of the things that I learned was the most powerful impact you can have in the healing process is listening, is just listening. And that was really surprising to me. And there's a song that I really love by Matt Carney. And one of the lines in the song is he's talking about little kids who are told, don't speak unless you're spoken to. And then they're never spoken to. And I thought about my own story, and I thought about how meaningful it was for me when people would listen to me and encourage my voice. And it became a passion of mine to listen to and encourage other people's voices. And I thought, how many of these youth, struggle to find a place where they can be heard. And I think that was just a big reason for me to want to start investing in trauma healing with teenagers. Obviously, I work with teenagers. I love working with teenagers, and the trauma healing was, at that time was for children and was for adults. And I thought, this is such an easy thing to adapt to teenagers. One of the things I've always believed is that if you set the bar low, people will be satisfied with just achieving mediocrity. But if you set the bar really high, people will reach up and try and grab it, jump, climb. And that to me is exciting. I've seen so many programs that have such a little expectation for what teenagers are capable of and can do. But I think they can change the world. I really believe that this generation right now is going to be essential in changing the world. And whether we want them to or not, they will change the world because they're going to be the only ones alive, and the ones who have the power and the ones who are making the big decisions. And so why not inspire them toward greatness? Well, one of the things that really inhibits our ability to grow is trauma. Trauma stifles people and gets people stuck. The trauma in my life has gotten me stuck, And as I've learned how to not only deal with my own trauma, but help others people deal with their trauma, I've seen them be able to achieve things that I don't think they even thought were possible. Certainly have been able to do things I didn't think were possible. Yeah.
How do you define trauma in the context of adolescent development?
Right. I mean, that's a scary word, trauma in and of itself. And one of the things that we have to figure out how to do is communicate this in a way that sort of doesn't scare people off. Trauma is sort of this little part. The way we express it in the teaching is we draw like this big circle, and inside the circle is grief. And grief sort of is anything that, we express grief when we experience loss. So when you lose something. So loss is magnified tremendously when you are in transition all the time. And transition doesn't even have to be me moving. It can be people around me moving. So if you're in a context that's highly mobile in either regard, either you're the one moving or other people around you are moving, or even worse, everyone is moving all the time. But that's the context of missionary families. That's third culture kids are by definition a part of cultures that are not necessarily their own, which implies a lot of movement to and from a home culture. So there's a tremendous amount of loss, and that's grief. But trauma happens when you sort of have losses that are amplified. Losses that are like you would experience during like war, horror. A loss that is really dramatic, extremely violent, repetitive. One of the things that like we see a lot in the news and is unfortunately sort of like when kids are exploited through molestation. I was molested from 3 to 14 years old.
Wow.
And that experience was very traumatic. When you have a loss of power dynamic, these kinds of things are really present. So horror, violence, anything that makes the loss sort of amplified, then makes it traumatic. When you go through something that, so for example, if when you lose a grandparent, it's very sad. There's a loss, there's grief.
Yes.
When you lose a grandparent because they're sick over a certain amount of time and they're older and it's expected, it doesn't diminish the grief, but it sort of lessens the amount of grief as you might have if, your grandma was hit by a car or something. Or now that is horrible. But now imagine, losing a kid. A kid getting hit by a car and dying is like an extremely traumatic thing for anybody, any family, any parent. I remember, when I was growing up, we had a missionary family whose husband died from appendicitis. Now here in America, that's a very obvious and easily curable thing. Even overseas, it shouldn't be something that leads to death. But I remember it was such a quick thing. Got up in the middle of the night with horrible abdominal pain, and by the next day he was gone. Wow. Traumatic. Young family, young kids, things we don't expect to happen. We know that people are going to die. We know that that's a part of life. But that's an example of like when bullying becomes violent or really mentally abusive and continues over a period of time, it turns into trauma. So we distinguish trauma from just normal grief by understanding a lot of those other things that go into making the loss extremely painful. Yeah.
That is a great explanation. Well, take me through the journey a little bit. What did it take to get from, where did you say you started? What was your first job before you did the youth pastor, the trauma healing? What did that
Oh,
journey
yeah.
look like,
Oh,
getting
okay.
from the beginning to where we are now?
Well, my very first job, believe it or not, was I made donuts.
Okay.
Yeah. So because I grew up in Cameroon, I didn't really have an opportunity to get a conventional job. There was no, you kind of had to hustle.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to kind of have friends who were already hustling. And one of my friends, his name was Marty. He
Yeah.
he dated my sister actually for a little
Huh?
while. Yeah, didn't go anywhere. He was he was a hustler, like next level, and he developed this donut business, a recipe and a way of sort of making a lot of donuts and selling them for a profit. And I inherited that business from him. So I started working with this upperclassman. Her name was. The great thing about this is I was a junior when I started doing this, and so I inherited it from her. She was a senior, so when she left, I got the business. So for 2 years, I made donuts. Ended up working with my cousin Jordan after that. And so we'd get up on a Saturday, and make the dough and let it rise, and then we eventually got to the point where we were selling 36 dozen donuts every Saturday, which for us yielded at the time about $100. Now, a lot of work for $100, but back then $100 made me the richest kid on campus. It was insane. And so we put money back into the business, and then we each took our cut, and it was cool. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun. And I worked after that. I worked for a little while in a home. I don't know what about old folks' homes. I served them. I don't know. I took their orders and brought them drinks and things like that. It wasn't really. It was just a part-time deal when I was in the U.S. for 1 year. But then when I came back, I went into fitness training. I worked at a gym. I ran people through their initial, this is how fat you are and you need to lose weight. Let's scare you with your body mass index and let me show you how things work. And hey, would you like a trainer? And that was a lot of fun. And then after that, I worked in landscaping for a little while. And then I went to college for 1 year, and then I came back and got married and decided I needed to get a real job that I could sustain for a long period of time, and just ended up working at a hotel. And I stuck at that hotel for 10 years. I was the van driver. I would take people to and from DFW airport, and I certainly got my 10,000 hours of driving, 8 hours a day, for 10 years, quite a long time. But I really loved that job, and I really grew in my relationships there. And one of the things that was great about that job was just the ability it gave me to learn. There's so much time that you can listen to things while you're driving, and but the main thing I was able to learn was I was thrust for the first time into American culture in a way that I hadn't been. I got out of the missionary bubble, and I was now like, okay, this is what normal Americans are like, and that was really, really good for me. I was so thankful for that experience. It also taught me a lot about just working at a job when it's great and when it's really not great. But I think my biggest takeaway from that job was, man, people love to be listened to, and they love people who are willing to just be curious about their lives. And I was curious. I loved listening, and I became friends with everyone at the hotel. And eventually, I became such good friends with my boss that my title went from driver to director of transportation. Yeah, which was a completely made up title, but it enabled me to go to all the cool stuff, all the fun outings that they went to. And I never wanted to move up. I never wanted to be at that place any longer than I had to be. But eventually, after that, God led me to being a full-time missionary. And when I remember telling my boss that I was going to leave, that God had opened up the door, because he already knew I'd been doing mission trips to Thailand and working with missionaries, and he knew that I had a passion for the Lord and I had a passion for mission work, and I was already volunteering with the youth group. And he he was very accommodating, and they threw me a huge going away party, which was really special. And the owners of the hotel ended up giving me $600 for my ministry.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it was such a sweet thing. It was such a beautiful bow on that experience. And after that, I went full time into, oh man, what is this youth ministry when I don't have to work for 8 hours and shove it in the cracks? And it really opened up like a lot of dreaming and a lot of like, wonder and opportunity to do things I just didn't have time to do. Because if I wanted to do a trauma healing course prior to this, I would have had to take time off of work, which meant no pay. But now I had the time to be able to pursue these goals a lot more intentionally. And so I worked from 2003 to 2013, March really, at the hotel. And then my last day was the end of February, and my first day on the new job was March 1st. So it was so amazing. So anyway, I did that for about a year, and then this trauma healing thing opened up, and I had the freedom to take the class, and I really loved it. One of the things I love to do is I love to teach and facilitate and preach. All those things are right up my alley. So a lot of this was just sort of a beautiful curriculum that fit my natural gifts anyway. And so you have to do healing groups when you get into trauma healing. So I really enjoyed doing the healing groups, and it wasn't hard for me to find. I had a men's group I did some healing groups with, but then I did it with college age MKs, because I'd been doing this for enough time now that I knew a lot of MKs, because they don't just stay little, they grow and they become older, and that's really awesome to see their journey. And if you stay in touch with them, then you get to be a part of that journey. So that was fun to bring to the college group and then invite them to learn about the trauma healing experience. And I started doing this, and I don't know how people, like my parents were highly involved in this world already and deeply respected. And so I think word got out somehow that I was doing trauma healing, but I was working with teenagers and young adults. And so when they decided to do the teen program, the teen trauma healing program, they asked if I would pilot the program. And I said, absolutely, I would love to do that. So I piloted the program, then they flew me out to Philly, and I was one of the first people to get certified to actually be able to run these programs. And so that started that journey, and since then I've been able to do teen trauma healing in the Solomon Islands and Malawi, and here in the U.S. And it's one of my favorite things to do overseas with groups of people, other than what I normally do, which is youth programs. But it's really rewarding. One of my favorite stories that came from doing trauma healing was there was this incredible young lady who was in a refugee camp her whole life. Her mother had an opportunity to leave the refugee camp. A gentleman had said, "Look, I want to take you with me. I want to marry you, and we'll leave." He wasn't from Malawi. He was an expatriate. He was able to go and take them all to Canada, take her to Canada, but she had a child. And he said, I don't want the child. I only want you. And so she was passed around in a refugee camp, as you can imagine, from home to home. And as she aged, this became a lot more traumatizing. She was molested by different fathers. She was kicked out sometimes, because she wasn't highly valued. She said she came to Jesus because when she had reached, adolescence, she had been kicked out onto the street, and she had to spend the night, as you can imagine, in the street in a refugee camp. And when she woke up, because she hadn't been raped that night, she said, "There must be a God." And she put her faith in him.
Well,
That's a very unique testimony. Not a lot of people would even imagine, that could be a reason to deeply resent and hate a God, if there even was a God. But that was her reason for believing that there was a God, because he had protected her through the night. Amazing. So she, as now a young lady, she has a passion for working with young ladies who have experienced similar things to her growing up and helping them. But the time for forgiveness comes, and she knows that God's going to ask her to forgive her mom, and she has this deep resentment and bitterness toward her mom, who abandoned her to all of these horrifying experiences. How could a mother do that? But the Holy Spirit compelled her to come. When she came, we had this little ceremony at the end where we gather around a little fire pit, and we symbolically burn papers where we've written some of our griefs and things we need to forgive, and it's so meaningful to see people go through that experience. And she's just there on her knees, and she's weeping and she's weeping. The next week she comes up to me and she says, "Caleb, I want to tell you something." And she says, "Do you remember that time around the fire pit? Do you remember this experience?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And she said, "I didn't want to come that day. I felt sick, but I felt like the Holy Spirit wasn't going to let me off the hook, so I came. And as I was kneeling there, I was forced to start the journey of forgiving my mom." And I told God I forgave her. And when I forgave her, I realized what it must have been like for her. I realized the situation she must have been in. And as she was telling me this story, I mean, how could you not just start weeping? It's unbelievable. She said, she talked about how her mom had wrestled with abandoning her, and how her grandmother had said, you can't stay. You have to leave. There's no hope for you here. If you have to leave your daughter, you have to leave your daughter. But the best way that you can help us is by getting out. You have to get out. And under all that peer pressure, and then the empathy that comes from what it must have been like to leave your child. It can be easy to only see your side of the story. But not only for her to be able to forgive this incredible horror that she was then exposed to, but then find an empathetic response. To me, that is one of the most powerful stories of the impact of trauma healing that I have ever come across. Bar none. And that kind of stuff is so incredibly rewarding. When I do this sometimes in the US, I don't get to see that kind of a response. There seems to be like a muted response in areas where we're just very out of touch with our own traumatic experiences.
Talk about that. What would you say the biggest struggle is for the young people you work with in the States, and what's holding them back?
I think we're really distracted. A lot of things compete for our time and our energy and our emotions. And I think we are really good at distracting ourselves and comforting ourselves and avoiding facing some of the things that we probably need to learn how to face. I know I'm great at that. I'm great at comforting myself with a streaming service. I am great at getting on my phone and distracting myself, looking at all kinds of articles or whatever. I recently had to give up online chess for Lent, and I'm grateful that that's ending soon. Yay for Easter being here on Sunday. But I realized that what I would do when I experienced even a second of boredom, it got really bad. I would pull up to pick up my kids at school, and I would be playing chess, in the 2 minutes it would take them to get to the car. I would get home and I would sit down after working all day, and I would, instead of talking to my kids or seeing how my wife's day was, I would just pull out, my phone or my tablet and start playing chess. It got to the point where it was almost like I'm at a red light, and I'm like, oh, I guess I can pull out my ridiculous, right? It gets to but it really, what this period of time away from it made me realize was, man, we don't like any kind of discomfort. if we can avoid discomfort of any, and boredom is kind of a low level discomfort. If we can avoid any kind of discomfort, we will. And we have the capacity to, because we live in a society where we can distract ourselves with video games, if that's your thing. We can distract ourselves with our cell phones. We can distract ourselves with watching shows. I mean, and so much of what is available to us to watch is designed to keep us completely hooked and distracted. These 30-second videos, you know. I started watching these fail videos on YouTube that are just so funny. And I realized, man, I can get lost in this world of nonsense forever. You know, there is zero end of my desire to watch someone fall down or run into a car or get destroyed. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's right. And I don't think that's good for any of us. And I think what that does is it delays a developmental necessity in all of our lives, which is we have to learn how to process and deal with the big emotions in our life. And if we won't, we'll remain immature and shallow in those areas. But if we're always comforting ourselves, if we're always distracted, you know, when I was growing up, I loved reading quotes. And one of my favorite quotes growing up that has captivated my heart, it is this: it is essential to cultivate an attitude of observation and reflection. And I think the problem is we have an attitude of observation, but we have zero attitude of reflection. We love to just constantly be in a steady stream of observing, but we don't want to reflect on what we're observing, and the things that we need to reflect on are the things that have happened in our lives. They're happening all the time. Because if we won't reflect, we won't grow.
That is such a great point. And I think back on some of the stuff I've done. I remember being pretty decent at AP Calculus. I had a great teacher, and I went through all those tests. Like the test had been around for 7 or 8 years, so I had like 8 years of practice tests. But what I found was it was way more fun for me to take another practice test than to go back through all of the mistakes. And I think that is an interesting thing that you say, because self-reflection takes some humility sometimes to go back through, this is what I did wrong, this is what I could do better. How many people have you heard that don't like the sound of your own voice? But if you're willing to listen to the sound of your own voice, you might find a way to talk in a way that's more pleasant. If you're willing to take a picture of your fat self, you'll see the progress when you have that body transformation to a fitter self.
Even learning how to desire a fitter self, I think it's lost. I think in some ways we're really good at lying to ourselves about where we really are, and using Photoshop in any area, even metaphorically, to sort of, and you know what I really believe? I think humor does that for us.
Really?
I think we live in a society that just thrives on humor and sarcasm. And humor and sarcasm is a way to sort of Photoshop the reality of my own insecurity, my own fear, my own doubt. And what I think the biggest, the thing that is lost, that is the most tragic here, you know, is a sense of purpose and meaning. Why am I here? And what am I here for? What is my goal? Am I getting closer to my goal with all these distractions? And we don't really, no one, I don't think anyone, when we're educated and we look back, we can say, yeah, I'm distracting myself. But I don't think it's malicious. I don't know that, I think it's just like, you know, okay, so if you had a bowl of popcorn on this table, I mean, whether I wanted to or not, I'd probably start eating it. Yeah. And I wouldn't just eat one piece of it. The salt and the butter, I mean, depending on how well you made it, I would just, you know, we subconsciously just devour the things that we're exposed to unless we have a trained response. And I think that's the issue. We have a trained response that is given to us sometimes through society, sometimes through parenting, which is just another way of saying other people, right? And so it's like, all right, our trained response is we watch things, we We take care of our boredom through a phone or a screen of some kind. We don't deal with things. We distract ourselves from things. Or when we want to deflect, we make a joke. And the funniest person, is the person that is the most paid attention to, or whatever, And so we develop all these habits and rhythms, and no one wants to stop, take some deep breaths, meditate, because as soon as we start doing that, I think what we immediately think is, oh, I'm going to be bored. But there is a depth and a richness that you only experience if you push through the boredom and learn how to think. There is something so powerful about learning how to just be in a room completely undistracted. The things that people can get done when they're focused, it's incredible. I can get a day's work done sometimes, it feels like, in just a few hours when I'm focused.
Yes.
And then I have the whole day to do what? And that's the real problem. What am I going to do with that? What I've learned recently is the things that I really want to learn how to do better and cultivate and grow in myself are these emotionally healthy responses. I want to see in myself, why am I withdrawing? And why am I distracting myself? Why am I soothing and comforting myself in these other ways? Instead of, and that's the question, instead of what? And I think when you don't have a what, when you don't have a goal and a focus that you can be drawn toward, that's tough. And when you're full of doubt, right? Like when you don't believe you can, you often choose not to even try. And I think it's so important for us to instill you were designed and created with a capacity and ability. And what you have to offer is essential. So let's deal with the things that get in the way so that you can finally discover, this is who I am, and this is what I'm here for. Man, that is such a powerful thing. And it feeds community in such a beautiful way because it gives purpose to it. One of the things that I've discovered is it is so fun to just sit around with friends and waste time and do nothing. But if you have friends that help you, you can reach levels that you could never reach alone. And when you have purpose and an understanding of what you're here for, it helps you understand how to draw other people into that. People are hungry for it, man. They're starving for that. They want someone who will believe in them and give them that direction. And I think, yeah. But it takes the willingness to just stop, observe, reflect, be bored, train yourself to push through to the point where you can say, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be about because this is who I am. Now go get it. Go get it.
And what role, you've already touched on this a little bit, but how does that tie into trauma healing if we have a sense of purpose?
Yeah. One of the things that is so almost universal is trauma healing tells me a couple of lies about myself. And one of the lies it tells me is I'm worthless. When I go through trauma, when I experience any kind of trauma ongoing, the message is this. If you were valuable, people wouldn't have done this to you. Because people did this to you, you aren't valuable. Because you have no value, people should have done this to you. You aren't worth more than this. This is your value. An object to be used and abused by others. Trauma healing, the healing part of that is, no, that's not true. You are valuable. People should not treat you that way. The fact that they treated you that way was wrong. Abuse is wrong. And it's wrong because you have incredible value. Now, when I know my value, what it does is it inspires me to think, okay, what do I do with the value? You know, we look at these cups and we say, well, we know what these cups are for because we know what cups are. Cups hold liquid. You know, cups hold this delicious water. You know, and so then the purpose of this cup is to hold this liquid and to help satiate thirst. And that's a beautiful thing. But when you don't know what you're for, you don't know how to do that. And one of the things that, you know, I think is so interesting is, you know, as I think about, okay, well, I'm valuable, that inspires me to say, okay, so how am I valuable? What are my unique gifts and qualities and abilities that I can bring to the table? You know, how am I different than you and everyone else? You know, so when trauma says you're worthless, and trauma healing helps you discover, no, I'm not worthless. I have value, and these things, you know, it's not okay that these things happen to me. I can find healing. I can finally be rid of my pain and my hurt. I can find truth to replace these lies. Then what you see getting birthed out of that is, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. Because I really believe that, like, what we want to do or what we're built for, like, it's a part of what's inside of us from the moment we're born. And I'm not saying that there's this one singular, like, job. Like, I was meant to drive. Yeah. But I think that there is, like, a bigger sense. And, you know, from a Christian perspective, I would say I was meant to enjoy God. I was meant to know him and connect with him. I was meant to love him and love people. And those are such beautifully abstract ideas. But then you start taking, okay, so how was I designed to love others? I think of Eric Little, I think is his name, from Chariots of Fire. And I think, with tears in my eyes, I think he says, God made me fast. And when I run, I feel his glory. And then he went and became a missionary in China. And that's amazing, right? But that was a part of who he was. And I think because God is so creative, what he does is he creates people who have these enormous amount of purpose to them. A purpose that is able to not only, like, generate enough for them to do for, 100 years on earth or less. Maybe that's a little optimistic. But for all of eternity. One of the things I like to think about is, Caleb, what are you going to be doing in 1,000 years? What are you going to be doing in 1,000,000 years? In 1,000,000,000 years? What are the purposes that are just kind of little seeds right now? What are they going to grow into? Now, all we have is right now to figure out, okay, so what do I do with my purpose now? And I think that's a great place to start. One of the things I like to tell the people I walk with is, if you figure out how to live this moment well, then what you'll inevitably end up doing is stacking one well-lived moment on another well-lived moment. And if you can do that consistently, you can begin to look back on a well-lived day, a well-lived week, month, year, a life that was lived well. But I have to know my value. And once I know my value, I have to begin to understand, okay, this is how I actually do that practically. There are things that I just am not very good at doing. And I don't worry about that too much. I try and grow and mature in the areas that I need to grow and mature in, but I get it. Like, I'm probably not going to be the world's best crochet person, or I'm not super great at carpentry. I know people who are great at carpentry and they love it. They get life and joy from it. I don't. But man, you give me a Bible verse, I can preach you a sermon. That's something I'm good at. I have the areas of my life where I recognize, wow, I'm valuable and God's given me a purpose, and I thrive in those areas. I love gardening. I love weightlifting. I love so many things that give me joy. I love playing chess. I'm never going to be, Magnus Carlsen. That's not my destiny. But I am going to use that to glorify God in all the different ways I can. It'll give me so many touch points and connections. And I think trauma takes so much of that away and obscures it and puts it behind a fog and lies to you about it. And I think when you understand your value and you process through your grief, you're able to begin to see things about you that give you life and hope and joy, and you're able to pursue those things without guilt and shame. And you're able to say, look, it's okay that I'm this way. I can value these things, and I can see how God wants to use them to glorify himself and to help me love people and to help me love him, and but trauma kind of hides that.
If a young person came to you and said, Caleb, I want that sense of purpose, and I want to break out of this cycle of fear and sadness, what's the first thing that you would tell them to do?
There's this there's this video by Brennan Manning that I love. He says, I believe that Jesus is going to ask us one question when we get to heaven. Did you believe that I loved you? And did you form your life based on that belief? And I think I would want to start with something that captured that idea. We can say so many things in our Christianese way, just these cliche, trite statements that have so much potential and power, but are completely made powerless because we remove the real meaning from them. We just say them, and then they just become a slogan without any actual meaning. And one of those things, I think, is Jesus loves you. And we say, okay, Jesus loves me, because we don't really know what that's supposed to do for us. And so I would, one of the things I really would encourage them to understand and do, one of the things I love to walk through with people, is what I call this teaching on righteousness, which for me was transformational in understanding the fact that Jesus loved me so deeply. When I understood that, it developed what I call this, it's right out of 2 Corinthians 5, this little verse that just sits there, and it says, Christ's love compels us. And I think that really, when that's your fire, it leads to so many other incredible things. And that's where I would want to help them try and get to. Can you live a life where you can honestly and authentically say, Christ's love is compelling me because I know how deeply I am loved by him. So let's read some scripture together and let's talk about it. Let's go through this teaching on righteousness. Let's understand how God designed us to thrive and live. Let's understand that there's a lot of other things that go into that. Sometimes it's let's get outside and get in the sun and take a walk and just learn how to be and meditate and sit, and let's learn how to focus. Let's eat healthy food. Let's make sure we're getting enough water and getting hydrated. Let's make sure we're not just consuming just giant quantities of unhealthy things. Let's eat a carrot every once in a while. Let's try and get some sleep. Let's learn how to get a good amount of sleep. Let's listen to music that's gonna feed us instead of rot us or overwhelm us. Let's have less screen time and more time out in nature. Let's develop some exercise patterns and routines. There are some really simple, easy little things that anyone can do. Everyone can do. And if you just do a few of them consistently, one of the things I like to say is the journey, it's a proverb, right? But the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, or how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. We cannot be afraid to take little bites, little steps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you said there. I think that really cuts to the heart of what we're trying to do with Growth Mindset Mastery is get people to a point where they believe that they can, for one thing. And I think when God is your desire, when that's what's driving you, when you're looking at the needs of other people, that sounds like something that I've experienced, where if your focus is all on yourself and you're trapped in that state of self-pity, it's very hard to experience any kind of joy, because we weren't meant to experience joy solely for ourselves. But when we experience joy by bringing help to somebody else, I think that opens up the possibility of experiencing joy even when we didn't believe it was possible anymore. Food gives me no pleasure. TV gives me no pleasure. But then when I do something for someone else, I'm become part of something that's higher than me.
I love that. It's beautiful.
In your journey from becoming a van driver to becoming an expert in trauma healing, what was the hardest truth you had to face about yourself?
There's a Rich Mullins song that I really love, and one of the lines in that song is, "We're not as strong as we think we are." I had to face the fact that I was a lot more emotionally immature than I would like to have believed about myself. I was able to observe the horribly damaging impact of anger in my life. And as I witnessed that, and I witnessed an angry me, one of the things I decided to do in response to that was completely withdraw when I would get angry. And so what I did was I exchanged one very emotionally immature response for another very emotionally immature response. But the danger of withdrawal was it really made it difficult to make any progress. If you're angry, there's a difficulty, but at least you're confronting something. If you're withdrawing, you're not actually confronting anything. And it's easy to really just kind of feel sorry for yourself. You can trick yourself into feeling like you're being very noble, like, wow, I am not yelling. But when you're disengaging, sometimes, I don't know if it was in a movie. Oh, maybe it was in a show, I think. And they said, the dangerous part is when it's not dangerous in a couple when they're arguing. It's very dangerous when they stop arguing. When they are arguing with each other, at least you can tell that they still care. When they've stopped arguing, it's like they have no interest at all. And I know that that's not exclusively true. Like, you can be harmonious and never argue, and that's lovely. But what I've experienced in my life is, the people that I really care about are the people that have the ability and the power to really get to me. And learning how to deal with that is really challenging. And part of it for me was being faced with the reality that, like, wow, I'm not as strong as I think I am. People hurt me and hurt my feelings for really stupid little things that I don't know why those things bother me and hurt me. And I felt a lot of shame and guilt when I would look at those things and say, well, why does it hurt me when someone says this or that or the other thing about me? And what I finally developed was this response that said, well, instead of angrily fighting back, I'm just going to withdraw and be cold and ignore. And then one day I was sitting and praying and meditating, observing and reflecting, and noticing things in my life that I wished were different. And the Lord, through a series of just books and podcasts and whatever, kind of took me through this, Caleb, a response that's different than anger and withdrawal is grace and kindness. And I thought, wow, that is so good and so obvious, and I wish I had seen that sooner. But why don't I do that? Then I was reading this book called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, and it was talking about how common it is for some of the experiences I'm having here to be expressed with pastors. Because it's very easy for pastors to be very charismatic and very endearing and welcoming and relational, and then to go home and be just terrible to their family. And that kind of hypocrisy represents an emotionally imbalanced and immature person. And what I realized is I need to reflect and understand, okay, why am I angry? Why am I withdrawing? When I went through that journey, I discovered things like, oh, I have a real sensitivity to being embarrassed. Now, I haven't gone completely down that rabbit hole, but what it did enable me to see is, oh, I'm angry because I feel embarrassed. I feel embarrassed because they did this. Is that really an embarrassing thing? Or, okay, I feel embarrassed. Instead of getting angry, let me just feel embarrassed and give myself permission to feel this way. Oh, I feel embarrassed. That's an unfortunate feeling. I know that this can sound really silly and simplistic, but I apply this even when I'm driving. Now when I'm driving, and I can get so angry when I'm driving, and don't know, that's probably just me, right? No. All of us can get angry while we're driving. But I notice what happens to me is, the other day I'm at a light, and it's a green arrow, and I'm behind the car. And the car just completely just is on their phone, not paying attention. And I'm getting frustrated, and I start honking at the car, angrily. Not the polite toot toot, the angry rah, da, 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 and I missed the turn. So now why am I angry? And I started processing. I am so angry at this car. And then it's so awkward, right? When you pull up and you're right next to the car at the next light, you're just like, and then you want to look at them, but you don't. I thought, why am I angry? I thought, well, I'm angry because they're making me late. I'm angry because I feel embarrassed when I'm late. I'm angry because they're not paying attention and they should be. I'm angry because their inability to do this right is inconveniencing me, and blah, 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 blah. So now I'm starting to think about it, and I realize, like, the word that I'm now using for this experience is I'm frustrated. I'm getting frustrated. And then I said, oh, okay, I give myself permission to be frustrated. I don't have to change them or fix this. I'm frustrated. And then I thought, and this is a frustrating thing. It is frustrating when someone is inconsiderate.
Sure. And
then you miss whatever it is you want to do. Or you're later, or you're inconvenienced. And then I realized, it's okay for me to be frustrated. This is frustrating. It's not okay when you get... And this is where the emotional maturity really comes into play. Like, if we're playing a game, and I beat you, and you throw the table into the wall and stomp off angrily, we all would expect that maybe from a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old, but we would never expect that from someone who's even reached like 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. There's a degree of... Why? Because when you play games, you learn, like, that's not appropriate behavior. You can be angry when you lose. You can get frustrated when you lose. You can get frustrated when you feel teamed up on or whatever. But there are responses that reflect an emotional maturity. Those responses have to be trained through experience. Maturity is a product of experiences. It's not a product of just getting older. And so when you're denied those experiences or don't go through them, you mature unevenly. And so here I am driving, and I'm like, well, I've got my 10,000 hours of driving plus, but I am immature in actually going through the experience of recognizing my anger and dealing with it and seeing it for what it is. And now that I'm doing that, what I'm realizing is I'm developing more mature responses because I was stuck in immature ones. I was stuck in just being angry. Now my anger has sort of mellowed out to frustration, and now it's like, okay, right? Well, where, when, and how are we actually really able to demonstrate grace and mercy? It's only in areas where we feel like we have been unjustly treated, right? So here I am at the light, and I'm frustrated, but what God's showing me is, now there's an opportunity. How can I be gracious and merciful in my response? Which then leads to joy, which is such a beautiful, ridiculous thing. It goes right back to what you were saying earlier about when I give, I receive, And so now it's like, okay, I'm driving, I'm being inconvenienced, I'm angry, I'm driving, I'm being inconvenienced, I'm frustrated, I'm driving, I'm being inconvenienced. I find the path to joy. The path that says, I'm going to bless this person. This triggers a different response, but it's a response that's been trained through a maturing process. Just like you now know what it feels like when you play with someone who is a gracious winner. We know what it feels like to play with people who are terrible. When they win, they rub it in your face, they laugh at you, they mock you, they belittle you, whatever. We also know what it feels like to play with people who, when they win, you almost feel like you won because they're so kind and gracious to you about it. They're so thoughtful. Now, take that to the people who lose. We know what it feels like you almost hate winning because the person's response when they lose is so dramatic. You're like, oh, I don't even want to play games with you. But you also know what it feels like to play against people who, when they lose, you almost feel like they won because, they won the moral high ground. Like, they're so kind and gracious and thoughtful. And what I think really facilitates this is exactly what you were talking about earlier, JT, this growth mindset. And I like to look at it like this. the word yet is so important. I didn't win yet. I haven't reached that level of maturity yet. I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't achieved it yet. I haven't fulfilled my purpose yet. I haven't found my understanding yet. The word yet really inspires me to keep trying. It inspires me to say, oh man, maybe I haven't gotten there yet, but yet means that I probably can get there if I keep going after it. Instead of saying, I haven't gotten there, I'll never get there, I can't do it, it's an impossible. I cannot be a patient driver. I cannot be a kind husband. I can't ever be someone who's not. I want people to see Caleb and say, oh, Caleb's a gentle person, instead of Caleb's pretty angry. You know, I want to grow in these areas, and I recognize that it's going to take a lot of growth. You know, I injured my back a long time ago, significantly, to the point where I could barely walk and couldn't walk. And I went to the chiropractor and spent lots and lots of money. And the chiropractor would put me on the table, and she would do adjustments that would last, maybe 30, 45 seconds. She would go boop, 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 boop. But she would do that twice a day. She did it twice a day for months and months and months. Those little bitty steps got me back to the point where I'm stronger now than I was ever before in my life. And it helped inspire me to see little bits of progress turn your not yet into something you're looking at in the rearview mirror, because you've not only done it, you've exceeded it tremendously. There's a show that I love to watch. I just cycled through it again. It's called Lost, and there's a scene in that show where these two guys are sitting on the beach and they're watching a ship come in, and one of them says to the other one, it always ends the same way. And the guy responds to him by saying, no, it only ends once. And everything up until that point is progress. And what I've realized in my life is sometimes progress feels like going backwards, but it turns into progress if you don't give up. Just like when you're hiking down a mountain, a lot of us who go hiking have experienced switchbacks. Depending on where you are at on the switchback, you may feel a lot further from your destination. But if you keep going down, back and forth on those switchbacks, the reality is you're actually getting a lot closer. When you're hiking to a destination that's thousands of feet above where you're at, and you reach a point where you have to go downhill to go back uphill, it can feel like you're going backwards. But I think these are metaphors for life. There are so many points in my life where I feel like I should have, or I ought to have been, or I wanted to be further along than I really was. Like recovering from an injury or whatever. And the reality is, that's just not how life is. Life is much more beautifully understood as a journey with ups and downs. And the people who you see doing incredibly well are the people who just won't give up, because they've actually internalized and believed it only ends once. Everything up to that point is progress. I just haven't done it yet.
I wonder what comes first there, the chicken or the egg. So when you say this, I do believe there are people that have that mentality. I wasn't one of them very easily. I think what helped getting out of that phase of it always ends the same way is, one, looking at the things that you have changed in the areas where you have been successful, but also looking for new sources of information, new things that you can try that somebody else has done and succeeded. When you look at somebody that is successful, you learn from them, you steal their stuff, then you do that thing, it puts you way ahead of the game. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think looking back on some of the things that I struggled with, I was just trying to reinvent the wheel. I think there's a reason we have books. We have all these great authors that put all this information on how to have good relationships and successful business and healthy bodies. And people don't go to libraries nearly enough. They watch podcasts, all great sources of information. But I think maybe one of the biggest reasons for some of this struggle is people don't have a central source of information. They're pulling from a lot of different places, or they're just not looking for that information. They don't realize that this is possible, so they haven't sought out any of that information.
Yeah, you might be right on that. You might be onto something. One of the things I've discovered is if I watch podcasts by myself, if I read a book by myself, I can retain some of it. The power of that process is when I read something that's really interesting to me and I share it. And then I talk about it and I chew on it and I wrestle. And I have a friend who says, that can't be true. And we look it up and we find a dissenting opinion. And then we kind of watch both perspectives and then we wrestle through it. If we're willing to and choose to do these things in community, man, it makes a powerful impact on our ability to retain it and grow from it. And it gives us a context for that growth. You know, if we choose to do these things on our own, there's still value in them. But I think the powerful sticking power is when we share them. And some of the things that I've learned, one of the things that I've learned is basically who I am, is the things that I want to spend my life learning, I want to learn so I can share. I want to discuss them and talk about them. I want to be challenged. I want to debate. And I think that's a big part of it too, is like, what's the point of this information? And I love it when people can, one of the things I love doing with you, JT, is you have so much interest and opportunity and ability to like do so much. You're so good at understanding and reflecting on political things. And I just don't pay any attention. And I love the way that you take that information and you bring it over and share it with me. And I'm sure in that process, it forces things to happen within you and within your brain and everything else that challenge thoughts that you have, that help you understand it and see it better, and then compel a curiosity to know more things that are more specific. And that whole journey, I think, is one of the reasons that we're called to live in community. You know, I don't want to just do this for my own sake. I want to do it because I can see the richness that it brings when I share it.
You made me think of a quote that I'm going to quote back to you. It's from yourself, so I'm going to quote Caleb to Caleb. A small level of thinking is talking about people. Intermediate is talking about events. High level is talking about ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that sometimes we're struggling to do a little bit. We get a little bit polarized in different directions, but maybe if we just got down and talked about the actual problem, we'd all find we had a lot more in common than we realized.
Yeah.
But I think that is great, to have that synergy, that connection with other people, because we can get stuck in our own heads. I mean, everything's kind of tailored to make our own individual reality to a point. We've got our own feed that's identical to nobody else's in the world because it's all tailored to our own specific interests, and it's kind of feeding our ideas back to us. If we really want to be able to grow and change the way we operate, we definitely need those people to have those different opinions. And we also need to be able to listen to those opinions and not just fight about things. If we fight, we stop talking.
That's so good. You're absolutely right. One of the things you said, I think, is so compelling. It made me think about the number of people I know that, it's sad, isn't it? That no one challenges them, and so they become so satisfied with their status quo. But it also gets a little depressing and boring, which then compels other kinds of behavior that we've talked about that is counterproductive. One of the things that I've realized is people love to be challenged. You know, I was challenged recently to lose 40 pounds. Now, I'm not doing great, but I'm doing a lot better than I would be doing if I wasn't challenged. You know, I was challenged also to give up chess for Lent, and I have been doing spectacularly at that. Now, some of these things I would never, ever, ever do. I would never do that if someone hadn't challenged me, because I really love my habits and I really love my routines. When we challenge each other, we it's almost like we're saying, I believe in you and I want to set the standard up here because I know you can reach it. And so I inspire you to keep taking hold of it. I think we have that when we're in college. We have that when we're in school, high school, whatever. We have that in like the sport clubs maybe that we are a part of. We have that in certain areas of life. But as you develop more and more into adulthood, I think you stop having that as a regular rhythm and pattern in your life. You stop having people who are regularly challenging you and inspiring you and saying, I believe you can take hold of more. I believe that there's more potential that you're leaving on the table. And I think, wow, how cool would it be if we developed a way of inserting that into our regular community connections with each other? Not in a way that sort of degrades value, but inspires what is possible because of the infinite value that we have in being created in the image of God. Sure. And I would love that. My wife is someone who thrives with a challenge, and it helps bring focus. Challenges bring focus and direction and growth. I remember the first time like someone challenged me. I don't even know if they challenged me. I was just kind of inspired by the idea. They talked about how they had been challenged to read the Bible in 90 days. And I thought to myself, that's bananas and crazy. And who could ever do that? And now I've done that every year for as long as I can remember. Wow. And last year I read the Bible 6 times in a year. And I was reading the Bible, which meant I was reading the entire Bible in 60 days. And I did it back to back to back. I never would have gotten there. I didn't just get there. And I know people who, they try to read the Bible in 90 days, they get incredibly discouraged, and it turns into nothing. And that's okay. Not every challenge is for every person. Some challenges are overwhelming and difficult and whatever. But hopefully they generate some measure of progress. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think a big part of our ability to grow in community is to be able and willing to challenge each other in an inspirational, encouraging way. I believe in you and I know you can do it. Go get it. And then, make those challenges that we know are going to produce growth. I have grown so much in putting down online chess in ways that I could not have anticipated or imagined. It's just produced good things in me. I've grown a little in trying to pursue, being more thoughtful in what I eat and how I eat, and being healthier in my habits and trying to lose weight. And I've grown so much through the challenges that have been offered to me in my life. And because I work because I work with a lot of young people and it's just a big part of who I am, I have lots of opportunities to engage and interact with them in this way. But I'm interested in figuring out how can I do this more with the adult friends that I have.
Speaking of which, those challenges, well, the ways that you want to challenge young people and older people, but specifically, I guess it could be millennials as well, but Gen Z, Gen Alpha, what specific challenges do you think that they're facing and they're going to face that previous generations might not have?
That's a great question. I challenge us to develop the ability to trust God with our lives. I start with trust because what I really think the issue for a lot of these, for this generation, tends to be is a fear that sort of generates an apathy and a depression and an unwillingness to try. I'm afraid that the world has been stacked against me and I won't be able to succeed and I won't be able to accomplish those great things. Well, I think that it's really hard to be even willing to try if you don't trust in God to provide and take care of you. Like go out there and give it your all, and if you fail, it's okay. If you fail, it's okay. That what I would love to see is less anxiety and more peace. But I think peace comes from our ability to trust. He will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on him. Trust in him. That trust produces, I think, this ability to have a peace that just resides within me. And when I'm walking around and I'm at peace and I have that peace, what it produces within me is a courage and a confidence to be able to go through the circumstances in my life. So I think that's one of the things I'd love to see happen is I'd love for us to develop this ability to see how when we trust God, it focuses our minds in such a way that allows us to be at peace. Now, when I'm at peace, I'm able to hear. I'm able to focus. I'm able to pay attention to and observe the things that are going on around me. I'm able to observe and reflect and grow. I'm able to see things that I can't see when I'm distracted and anxious and always moving. And I think that's the other thing I would really love to see cultivated is just a willingness, I challenge, to take up a challenge to say, I want to develop the ability, and maybe start small, to just be still and quiet for maybe 5 minutes a day, and then maybe 10 minutes, and then 15, and then 20 minutes. Develop and cultivate the ability to just rest and be at peace within yourself. And then to start seeing all the things that are coming out of that. I think that what hopefully will be cultivated in that process is the truth that you are incredibly valuable and you have been created to do amazing things. Designed. You have what it takes. You have what it takes. Man, I get excited thinking about a generation that really absorbs that message. I'm loved, I'm valuable, and I have what it takes. So I'm going to go get it. I'm going to go see it done. I think we can get so... there are a lot of messages that would say that's impossible. It's never going to change. But I think we're already beginning to see, no, I think these things can change. I think as we understand them better, we can learn how to change them. We can inspire that change in others as it was inspired within ourselves. We can put an end to so many of the destructive things that are out there. We really can. We can learn how to use our screens as tools instead of letting them run our lives. We can learn how to not be distracted. We can learn how to be present and engage and interact. We can learn how to live in meaningful, healthy communities. We can learn how to be done with so many of the things that we think we're enslaved to. We can see mental health shift dramatically. Each generation can say, I will be the generation that solves this issue. These are solvable issues, every single one of them. We can see them solved. Let's set that standard high. Let's go take hold of it. Let's go get it. That's what I want to say to them. Go get it. It's yours. It's right there. And you have what it takes. And nothing that's happened to you can prevent you from going and getting it. It's like that beautiful Rocky Balboa moment. It's like, it's not how hard you get hit, right? It's how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. I'm not going to say that they haven't been hit with a lot of challenges. And every generation has been hit with a lot of challenges. I've been listening to this podcast on World War II. I mean, that was an insanely impossible, unbelievable challenge. And I was thinking about one of the things that FDR was saying. He said, look, we haven't done it yet, but we will. We haven't had a lot of success and victories yet, but they're coming. So don't stop believing. Sounds like a Journey song. Anyway, don't stop believing. We can't stop believing in the potential that lies ahead because we're not the ones who gave it. He who began the good work will see it completed. I can trust in that. I can trust in that in me. I can trust in that in you. I can trust in that in anyone who's willing to take hold of it. He who began the good work will be faithful to complete it. Man, it's just true. And the mysterious, wonderful ways that he's worked in my life, I know he will work in yours and others. And I know that this is the God who says, and this is my favorite quote of all time, so small, so simple, and yet so inspiring and true. This is the God who says, big problems, God is bigger. When you just hold that little kernel, man, you just say, here you go. Root that in your generation and watch your generation just explode and take us beyond what I'm even looking at, to heights that I can't even imagine. Yeah.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. We talked a lot, which is great, about what we could say or would say to people, because those are the questions I've asked. But you said something earlier that was really great about how you learn to listen to people as a van driver. And I wanted to ask, how do you create spaces where youth experiencing trauma or that have experienced trauma, how do you make them feel safe to open up?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of things that you can do. Creating silence. That's one of the hardest ones for me, is just creating that space, training yourself to just sit in silence and be okay with it. Asking a question and waiting. Sometimes it's really hard to answer questions that are so deeply emotional, and part of the trauma healing process requires us to answer those kinds of questions. There are 3 questions that they kind of train you to ask, and in a specific order. What happened? How did it make you feel when that happened? And what was the hardest part? And it sort of focuses your thinking. And what happened can kind of be an easy place for people to start. A lot of our conversations are just sort of reflect that, right? Well, this is what happened. But how we felt about it can be a little bit more nuanced and complex. Because we can have conflicting feelings. We can have like excitement or fear and joy and like anxiety, and they can all be happening at the same time. Like riding a roller coaster, you can get really excited because you know it's going to be fun, and yet you're terrified, and part of the fun is being terrified. And so traumatic experiences can have lots of nuanced feelings, and then trying to take that and go to the part that's so difficult, the hardest part of the experience, is really challenging, because it forces you to sort of really process your emotions well, and our hardest parts are going to be different. The things that are really hard for me may not be hard for you, and vice versa. And so one of the things that I've learned in helping people feel safe is not interrupting, is learning how comfortable they are with eye contact and just proximity, trying to create a safe space for them where they don't feel like they're going to be interrupted by something else. Simple things like hospitality, have a glass of water, have something for them to eat. Not having a time limit that feels like it's constraining. And just, being kind and appropriate. One of the things that I've struggled with in the past is like, I love to joke around with people, but sometimes that can make people feel unsafe, like they're not being listened to or taken seriously. Other times, humor can really ease and help people feel comfortable. So it's important to know like how to balance that, depending on how traumatized a person is. And people need to know how much you care. When they know that you really care about who they are, because you've been patient and you've been hospitable and you have listened and you've asked questions that reflect that you're listening, they'll continue to open up and feel safe opening up. It's hard to not insert your own fixes. People tend not to feel safe when you try and fix their problems. It can actually communicate that you're judging them. So it's really important to keep that in mind. That was something that was so helpful for me to learn. People are actually, this is one of the things my dad shared with me that really helped me. People are actually a lot smarter than you think they are. And often as they talk about their issues, they discover their own solutions. And giving them that opportunity is huge. It can almost make you feel like patronized or belittled when someone gives you like a solution that you've already thought of yourself. Like, come on, I know that. So that's another thing that helps people feel safe. Is just, wow, interesting. Okay, tell me more. I'm not here to fix you. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to just listen to you. When people feel that safety, man, they will tell you things that will blow your mind and open up to you in ways that you may not expect or be able to anticipate. But that process is actually the solution. The solution probably isn't in, well, maybe you should just drive slower or whatever, The solution is often, in trauma healing, the solution is being able to express yourself. That's the healing process. That's when I'm able to express myself and share about the experience. That's the antibiotics and the bandage. That's the cast and setting the bone. That's the surgery and the stitches. That's all of that whole process, that whole healing process is experienced in just simply having someone listen to you. When someone listens to you, it gives you this message like we've been talking about that says you're valuable, you're important, you're loved. That is unbelievable. And when you get that and are accepted how you are, it's incredibly healing. It's incredibly healing. And just being able to share. Yeah.
That's really good. Well, on that note, what signs might indicate a young person has or is experiencing some kind of trauma that they're unable to talk about?
Yeah, all kinds of things can do that. Any kind of behavior that would prevent you from having the time, and I'm talking about any kind of addiction, overworking, sleeping too much, sort of opposites, right? Like I'm too busy, or I'm just withdrawn and I'm just always just checking out. Video game addiction, alcohol, drugs, any kind of addiction that sort of occupies and is used to help someone check out or avoid. That is a big sign. An inability to focus is another huge sign. When you're around someone and they're you can almost feel the anxiety just in the air with them. You can tell like something's not okay, something's wrong. Kids who have muted reactions or overreactions, they're never excited or they're always just overreacting to everything. That's a huge sign that there's been some kind of trauma probably taking place. So that numbness is sort of like a way to protect yourself a little bit, but it shouldn't last forever. A lot of the trauma signs are tricky because, if I'm startled, I'll react in a certain way, but if I'm just constantly doing this, that something's wrong. But if there's a loud noise and I do that, like it's okay. And so like there's a time period where you're like, okay, this hard thing has happened. It makes sense for them to, But when those norms, and obviously they're norms, but everyone responds differently. When you see someone who's like, yeah, I'm at a new school and it's hard and I'm isolated for a little while, but now I'm making friends, and when you see someone who refuses to make friends, who refuses to interact or engage, and some of these things happen because you make vows based on the trauma you've had. Like I have no MKs who have made vows like I'm never gonna make close friends because every time I make a close friend they leave and that hurts and I'm tired of that experience. So they intentionally isolate themselves. You can tell like there's some trauma here. Why are you isolating yourself? But Sometimes you'll meet someone who, I mean, I'm not this way at all, so it's hard for me to understand this, but you'll meet someone who's introverted, and being at a big loud event is a little bit like challenging for them, and they need to like get out, so they'll go out, and they'll get some space and they'll rest. And so it's important to like not make assumptions, but to ask, So if I did that, someone would be like, "What's wrong with Caleb?" And I get this all the time. Why is Caleb acting weird? If I'm tired and I'm not talking a lot or something must be wrong, because it's normal for me to talk a lot. But I wouldn't say that for some people. And so when you meet new people, it's important to recognize those differences in personality can mimic, and that's why it's hard to recognize trauma unless you've known someone for a long period of time. And then you can see, when you have a big shift in behavior, that points to something traumatic may have happened here. And it doesn't always look the way you think, because some people's shift in behavior can be much more like charismatic or intriguing, and those are the ones like much more risk taking. Well, the problem is sometimes it's an important, fear can be there's a healthy component to fear, because it sort of mitigates the amount of risk I'm willing to interact with. But people who are just always taking risks can be really interesting and compelling people, and so that's a shift that can sometimes hide the trauma, because there's like, oh, this is so interesting, this person is now getting a motorcycle and whatever. But any big shift in behavior can indicate some kind of trauma, and sometimes that person won't even be able to track it back. So it takes time listening to them to sort of get to, oh, okay, as I trace this back, I see that this traumatic experience has led to it's like dominoes. Boom. So.
How has your approach to trauma healing changed throughout your career, through the whole time you've done trauma healing ministry?
I think that, the longer you do this stuff, the more you learn, and the easier it is to sort of adapt and change your linguistics. Some of the core foundational pieces don't change, but you can learn lots of different ways of saying what happened, how did it make you feel, what was the hardest part. I think overall I've just become a lot more patient, and my willingness to trust the process has grown significantly. It's exciting when you see an immediate shift, but sometimes it takes months for that shift to take place. I think for me, one of the things that God does this, I think, for certain people, like he gives you just a measure of grace for certain people that's extraordinary. And I know he's done that with me and certain people that I've met with who I recognize trauma in. And just, I think a big part of my journey recently has been that hopeful, not yet, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. Think of the prodigal son story sometimes, how the father has his eyes kind of up looking down the road. It's not like he's sitting on the porch just holding, his son's shirt, crying, looking up at the road. He's not obsessed. He's living his life. He's doing, well, we don't know, but I'm assuming he's living his life. He's doing what he needs to do. But he's hopeful. He's looking down the road, and we don't know how many times he looked down that road and saw nothing. But we do know that when his son was coming, he saw him from a long way off, because he hadn't stopped looking. And I think that's part of what I have experienced as a measure of growth in my trauma healing journey is I have gone through that cycle of sort of feeling like I've given up on some people who have experienced tremendous amounts of trauma. And now I'm looking down the road again. And I'm re-engaging and recreating some of those relationships that I felt like, it had ended. And now I'm believing, no, it's progress. Be patient. Keep waiting. Keep looking. And recognize that it takes a village Some people's trauma experience will be healed with another person. One of the movies I love. It's such a beautiful movie, and it's Patch Adams, and he goes through this extreme experience of trauma where he loses someone he cares about very deeply, and he's ready to go kill himself. He's ready to be done. And he sees this butterfly. Well, he had friends, he had community, and the person he lost had a deep, meaningful connection with these butterflies and her story. And that's one of the things that I think is so beautiful about that picture is we were designed to live in harmony with each other and to play the role that we're meant to play in each other's lives. And when you do a lot of trauma care, you can start believing that you're the only one who can do the role. And the reality is, no, you're just part of a process, a community where you do the role that you're supposed to do and someone else does the role that they're supposed to do. And when we all function together in that role, we're all a part of each other's healing process. So keep your eyes down the road, keep believing, play the role that you're meant to play. And trust that other people, as they play that role and as God leads and inspires them to play that role, that the healing will come from the master healer, that he'll use the people that he has comforted to extend that comfort to others. And that takes so much pressure off of me. I used to carry a lot of the pressure that I didn't need to carry because I thought I needed to do for everyone. And now what I realized is I don't need to do for everyone. I just need to do my part with the people that God's given me to do my part with. And I'm satisfied, like actually satisfied with that. And that's a good place to be. It's a very good place to be. But, requires a lot of trust.
That story about the butterfly and Patch Adams, it seems like there's a lot of stories like that where somebody was going to kill themselves and they saw hope. And I remember one story somebody told me, I don't know all the context or details, but someone was going to jump off a cliff and they saw a ray of sunshine. And it was presented to me in the context of, if something that beautiful exists, then maybe I can go on anyway. And I think if I know that God exists and God is good, maybe that makes up for all of the evil that I see around me. And I wonder if that's along the lines of what the person you were talking about earlier in the story, the refugee, made me think of that when you got this story. So I wanted to trace back to that a little bit. Giving somebody hope when they have none seems to be one of the most powerful ways to combat that feeling of I wish I was not. I wish I wasn't here. I wish I did not exist. I heard a story a couple of different times about, have you ever heard the experiment where they put rats in little buckets to see how long it would take them to drown? Poor rats. But they found that the rats, I don't remember the exact times, but it was something like if you left the rat in the bucket, it would drown in about 15, 20 minutes. But then they had a different group after their control group where they took the rats and they put them in for about 5 minutes less than when they would have drowned, so say 10 minutes, and then they take them out of the bucket for a little bit to let them dry off a little bit, and then they put them back in. The difference is the ones that you just put in the bucket drown at 15, 20 minutes. But if you put them in, give them a rest, and then put them back in, the second time they're in there, they paddle for up to, I think it was something like 40, 100 hours.
Wow.
Because they have that little bit of hope is there's still a chance that I get out of this. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah. I love that. Amazing. Yeah.
So what gives you hope when working with young people who have experienced significant trauma?
Yeah, the stories, like her story, gives me hope. Gives me hope when I meet a guy like Coco who has experienced such profound, so many obstacles in his life. You know, he was a refugee from Congo, where I was born, and the the soldiers came and they kind of roughed up his family, roughed up his sister a little bit. And you can imagine what I mean when I say that. So that night they left. They ran off into the forest. And in the process of getting away, they lost mom, and they could never go back for mom. And they went from Congo and eventually through and down from Tanzania, from refugee camp to refugee camp. They ended up in Malawi, and that's where I met him. He was sharing his story with me, and he would get up, and they ended up living with his aunt and uncle, and so it was him and his sister and his aunt and uncle, and there might have been some other people there. And he was telling me his story about how they had a shop where they would sell shoes, and their shop would often get broken into, and then they'd lose everything, have to start over. And so he ended up, doing his homework in the shop by candlelight, and sleeping in the shop to guard it. He's not this big guy either, and he ended up having to do lots of chores. And his sister was really injured medically from the trauma that she went through with the soldiers, et cetera, et cetera. I listen to all of this, and I see him, and he comes to class, and he's the most attentive. He's cheerful. He's got hope. He was one of my best facilitators, that I was able to train, and watching him work with these kids. And this whole process was incredible, and he just never stopped believing that they would find mom, and he never stopped believing that his sister would get better, and he never stopped believing that if he just did what he needed to do that day, if he just kept studying, and he kept going and watching the shop, and when he had extra energy and time, he would help get water for his family, and he would do what he could, just a little bit more for his sister, and just a little bit more, and just a little bit more, and he just took those steps. He tried to be an example of someone who said, I'm going to live this moment well, and if I live this moment well, when I get to the next moment, I'll live that one well too, and I'll look back on a well-lived life. And eventually he was able to get out of that refugee camp, and now he's in Idaho.
Wow.
He was sponsored. I mean, how do you not want to sponsor a guy like that who just has this continual desire to not stop grinding, not give up, not wallow in the self-pity? And he has every reason to legitimately feel like a victim, because he is one. And he looks at that as an opportunity instead of a stopping point. His story gives me hope. Right? People who choose to ride out against it. So many movies give me hope. Scenes like in the Two Towers where, they're pushed all the way back to the very, very last fortress in Helm's Deep, and Theoden says, what do you do against so much reckless hate? And Aragorn says, you ride out against it, ride with me. People who choose that as their response, who say, look, it doesn't, we're all going to be found one day. Every single one of us, there's a clock. I don't know how long my clock's going to tick before I'm out of here. But at some point, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be somewhere else. I'm going to pass on. We're all going to be found. How do you want to be found? Man, I may be found in a bad way, but when I'm found, I want to be found trying. I want to be found riding out against it. That movie Saving Private Ryan, you see them land in Normandy, and they get out of the transports, and they're storming the beach. The movie's not very good if it's about the first guy who gets shot. It's a pretty short movie. But that guy had so much courage. When he's found riding out against it, saying, I'm not going to stand for this. I'm going to give my life for it. I'm going to keep pursuing something bigger than myself. That gives me hope that at some point, it's going to end. Man. And we have what it takes. And every knee's going to bow and every tongue's going to confess. And Jesus is coming back. And the God who loved me enough to send his only son to die for me is the God who sent his son also to prepare a place for me. And that God, who is bigger than every problem I could have, gives me hope. Gives me hope because I've seen him do things that I knew were impossible over and over and over again. And it gives me hope. Gives me hope to look at the impact of the lives. You know, I have seen so many people fall away, walk away, despair, and give up. And I've seen so many people thrive and go from just build on and build on and build on. And it's hard sometimes to not think of the relationships that feel like failures. But it's so beautiful when I'm reminded of the many, many relationships that are just thriving. And one of my favorite verses is out of Hebrews. Encourage one another daily as long as it is called today, so that none of you are hardened by sin's deceitfulness. And when we are encouraged, I think that's another way that we receive hope. You know? And when we look at our own progress, it gives us hope. But there is nothing like I love like the season we're in right now, Easter, where the hopelessness that was felt when Jesus said it is finished and died, and the unbelievable hope that was experienced when they went and found the tomb was empty. Man, there's a lot of hope in an empty tomb. Death's been defeated. There's a lot of hope in that. And so, this is not the end.
No, it's not. What role does having a sense of humor play in trauma healing?
Oh, it's essential. I don't know how you can be a good trauma healer without a sense of humor. There's something about laughing that is incredibly healing. One of the most healing things is laughter. And there is something about like a level of comfort and vulnerability that is associated with humor when it's done well. When it's done well, that you can't get anywhere else. And it's tiring. Listening and all of these things like that we're talking about are exhausting. But humor makes it feel lighter, makes it feel easier, brings a degree of rest and joy in life to it that brings a balance. You know, yeah, it's really important. It has to be natural. Not everyone is skilled in bringing it. It has to be done well. But when you find that person who can do it well, what you end up with is, I would say one of the things that it has the ability to do is it can shorten the process tremendously. You know, and just another Rich Mullins line that I really like. When I laugh, if I can make you laugh, I know I can make you like me, because when I laugh, I can be a lot of fun. And I know that isn't necessarily the whole point of what he's saying, but it's true anyway. When we laugh, we feel liked, we feel loved. When we can make people laugh, we feel liked, we feel loved. That whole part, like, it shortens the journey. It helps us see a light that maybe we couldn't see. It's sort of like, I kind of think about it like the Patch Adams butterfly thing. Sometimes laughter is like that butterfly.
A paramedic told me a story where it was exactly like that. He told me about a story where he had to save 3 kids, except he couldn't save. Well, I think there were 5 or 6 on the ground, and he had to pick 3. It's like, and pray that he picked the right one, because the accident was so traumatic. Maybe none of them are alive. Maybe none of them are savable, but you've got to choose. And it weighed so heavy on his heart, trying to do the best he could to save as many as possible. And he said, I was walking off really solemn with my partner, and then my partner makes a joke. And that might sound terrible to somebody that doesn't fully understand gallows humor. I'm not great at that, but I know that it does help me when I'm in the hospital working as an RN to have a laugh. It's not always about something terrible, but it stood out to me when we started training. They actually had us do a laughing exercise or go ha ha ha, ho ho ho, and just as a whole group, it felt as weird as it sounds, but it does change something. They said when you get your body to laugh, even if it's not funny. And that's one thing I've been trying to train myself to do in the hospital is just find opportunities to laugh. It doesn't have to be that funny, but if you exaggerate the laugh when something's even just a little bit funny, you learn to laugh about something that doesn't feel funny at all at the time, but it's going to be absolutely hilarious later. If I had time, I'd tell you all the great stories where I felt so annoyed being talked down to by somebody, but the way they did it, when I tell people about it later, they're just laughing to tears. And I think you're absolutely right. If you don't learn to laugh, you learn to cry. And really, we need both of those things. But if we don't learn to laugh, our souls get heavy.
Yeah. It gives you energy.
It does.
Yeah.
It makes you feel happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you do for yourself when you're processing all this trauma and you're listening to everyone else? How do you keep yourself healthy? How do you keep yourself sane?
I drink a lot. The biggest thing I've had to learn how to do is respectfully share the things that that are shared with me in the most gossipy way. No, I need to share. I need to be listened to as well, and I need to find people that I can share with while protecting the story and the integrity and not betraying confidence. Everything that's shared with me should be confidential, but it's how you unburden yourself, and so that's one way, and it's important to be able to do that in community in a way that's honoring. It's not like I don't ask permission. Like when I'm sharing these stories from these people I met in these refugee camps, I ask them for permission first. But those are such heavy stories. To be able to share them is so hopeful and beautiful, but some of these stories are just hard. So it's beautiful to be able to kind of, like, I'm grateful that I'm married. I can share things with my wife and trust that they will be kept confidential, and there's a sensitivity there that is really important. And she doesn't know a lot of these people anyway, and if she does, I can keep the names out of it, So that's one thing. Another thing I realized is I have to play. If I don't play, I get very grumpy. It's not good. So when I'm meeting with people now, especially if this is kind of part of what we're doing, this trauma thing, I try and build in ways of playing. Let's listen for a while. Now let's go play a game, or let's go do something that's fun. Let's go on a walk, or let's whatever. I've realized that when you do that, what you end up doing is you build a real relationship that's less, I'm here to bestow my wisdom upon you, and I'm here to walk with you, to walk beside you. But it just helps me. It just helps me a lot to play. And to see the complexity of a person, right? It's important to see that we're not all just one, the part that most of people see, everyone has multiple parts. There's so many parts to everybody. And there's a part that you get to see when someone plays. It's really helpful. Not everyone's willing to do that, so you have to make sure if they can't play, or if they're not people who are playful, then you have boundaries that are really helpful. But those are a few things. I just, depending on what it is, I try and spend a lot of time in the Word. I try and spend a lot of time praying and bringing these things to the Lord and asking for His wisdom. And for me, some of the boundaries that I've set that are super helpful is, unless it's a real emergency, I try to not do things at night when it's or late at night. I really prefer to be able to interact during the day, middle of the day, morning or afternoon is fine. But I really value sleep, and I value having enough time between when I'm doing these kinds of things and wanting to go to bed, to be able to process it and not let it just overwhelm my mind and prevent me from being able to sleep. So, yeah. But there is, I think one of the things that I practice that probably helps me more than I realize is just weightlifting. Just, exercise helps get rid of and process a lot of the emotional angst, I think, in all of us. And I hate running, so I won't do that. But lifting weights, I think, gives it, or one of the things that I also love to do that I also think actually really helps me with this, and I know this is actually scientifically proven, is I love to garden. There's just something about getting your hands in soil and dirt and being out in the sun and seeing beautiful flowers. I specifically choose places where I can see beautiful things. That really, really helps me. It makes me think of this. One of my favorite scenes in Superman Returns is he is really injured, but he's the only one who can help. And as he's rescued in this airplane from the water, and he has a piece of kryptonite stabbed into him, and the kryptonite gets taken out and thrown out of the airplane, and he gets out of the airplane and he flies up into the sun, and there's this scene where you can see him just absorbing all of that power before he goes back down into the darkness and saves the day. And I think for me, that time just in beauty, that time with the Lord, that time worshiping, just does something amazing within your spirit. That those times playing games or, having good fellowship is sort of like the way that you fly up into the sun and remind yourself, man, there's an amazing, it's your butterfly moment. You need those. This is an amazing world. God is an amazing God. Now let's go get it. Let's go do what needs to get done.
100%. Yeah, I'm thinking about your weightlifting, because I remember a friend that I like going to the gym with. He would tell me, yeah, this is my therapy.
Yeah.
I can journal. I do journal. And it almost sounded like he was defensive, like some people had been telling him, exercise is not enough. I think there's definitely a place for journaling and all that other stuff, but there is something about getting to move your body. We're meant to move. There's research that's shown that that's the primary function of our brain. We tend to think of our brains like an incredibly complex computer. In reality, the brain is primarily programmed for movement. If you don't move, you don't need a brain. That's why all those sea animals, they grow there where they're planted. They don't need a brain. Don't move. But I think there's something therapeutic about that. And I don't think everyone realizes that even some of our higher cognitive stuff, that really comes from a part of our brain that's designed to help us pre-plan certain movements. So I think if we exercise other parts of our brains, we have all these stresses coming at us and we're standing still. When we're stressed, we're supposed to be moving around. We're supposed to be sweating that cortisol out. We're supposed to be doing all these things that you do in a world where we're not all working a 9-to-5, typing at a desk.
That's so good. Yeah. It's true. It really helps you even when you are dealing with when you're helping someone process trauma. If you can get them moving, even if you're just going a walk together, it's amazing. Or throw the football or something. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely, it's really good.
There's something about the sunlight too. I'm not sure why, but just being out in the sun, if you can go out there and actually let a large part of your body be exposed to it, you feel the sweat, everything slows down like a lizard sunbathing on a rock. You feel the difference almost immediately. I mean, if you've been stressed and you just take 20 minutes to sit in the sun, sometimes it makes a world of difference.
Yeah, you're right. It's so nice, right? Like right now it's spring,
Right.
And we're starting to be able to get outside, and the sun is so healing. And then I know a lot of people dislike being too hot, and I get it. And I sweat just absurd amounts, and it's obnoxious. But I think the summer tends to be a joyful time for people because of that. We get outside and we're exposed to a lot of sunlight, and we're doing stuff. We're going to the lake. We're, and I notice a real shift in my mood, even when I walk outside, and am able to start like being outside more. I'm drawn to it, and in the winter, I don't want to go outside. There's not a lot of beautiful things to look at, and it's cold.
Yes.
But now that it's spring, I'm like, I want to be outside all the time. That really is helpful in like putting aside a lot of distractions and screens and stuff. One of the things I love to do is I put on like these nature videos when I'm just hanging out inside. But man, there's nothing like actually being in nature. And I think you're right. I think it's that feeling. There's something just so cozy, right? Like even people who like to be cold and think coldness is great, when they sleep, they usually sleep with a blanket. Like they want to be cozy when they're actually wanting to be comfortable and safe and go to bed.
All right. Well, I have one final question to ask you. What would you do if you weren't afraid?
I guess there are things that I might take more risks. I mean, I don't tend to feel afraid very often. I tend to feel pretty confident in who I am. But I think the areas of my life where I think I have an unhealthy fear, because I think some fear is healthy, I think are the areas where I don't move. I'm stagnant. I'm still. And I think the older I get, the less afraid I get or overwhelmed I am about certain things. And I think if I wasn't afraid, I would pursue certain dreams and certain passions with even more energy. And I'm trying to be more specific here because that'll be more interesting. But one of the things I've been thinking about recently is how much fear of man do I have? How afraid am I about what people think? And I think in some areas I am not afraid at all. And in other areas I probably still carry around quite a bit of fear. And there are some decisions I think that are lying ahead of me that I think if I wasn't afraid, it would be easier to make those decisions and follow through with them. I think of the biggest decision I ever made was leaving the hotel and becoming a full-time missionary, and the fear there was, what if I don't make enough to provide for my family, and I have to go back? And I think that's where I remember God saying to me, Caleb, if you are who I made you to be, I will provide for you. And I think in some ways that is inspiring, to continue being who God designed me to be and watch that process unfold. And the times in my life where I forget that or neglect that, I'm afraid of losing that, and I want to stay. I want to keep that fear. I want to allow that fear to motivate me, to remind me that I need. But fear of man can impact your ability to be who you know God made you to be. Worrying too much about what they're going to think of what you do and say. And I think that's kind of where I'm learning, like, how do I let that stuff go and say, I serve before one audience, and that is Jesus Christ. It matters what he thinks and no one else. And it matters because I love them and care about them. But it doesn't matter in that I'm not held accountable to them. I'm held accountable to him. And I just want to keep growing in my ability to hold that, hold that truth and be inspired by it boldly and confidently into the next phase of my life. Thank you, JT. That was a great question.
Thank you, Caleb. This was a great interview.